The fact that the South Korean film Burning is a mystery is no mystery at all. In fact, nearly every review of this critically acclaimed 2018 film, every news headline, every interview with cast and director riffs off of that idea that the film, which was the first South Korean submission to make it to the Oscar shortlist, is so steeped in uncertainty that it's impossible to pin down. Whether we're discussing plot, form, or production, ambiguity touches everything. This ambiguity is what makes Burning an excellent character study of rhetoric, which William Covino in his book The Art of Wondering describes as the elaboration of ambiguity. He explains that rhetoric, what's typically thought of as the simple art of persuasion, can't be pigeonholed as mere decoration for thoughts, or as a tool or technique to create arguments and manipulate audiences, though these could both be effects of rhetoric. Instead, he encourages us to see rhetoric as an art of invention, of hypothesizing different variables informing a speech situation, and reflecting on how the situation is affected. Put another way, rhetoric takes uncertainty and generates multiple possibilities for its explanation, none definitive. It's the opening of ideas, not the closure. For film, David Blakesley explains that rhetoric serves to exploit or elaborate ambiguity in order to foster identification, or to help viewers see themselves in elements of cinema, both diegetic and ideological, as potentially contingent. Burning, an adaptation of Haruki Murakami's equally cryptic short story Barn Burning, performs and ruminates on this elaboration of ambiguity in a multitude of ways. Director Lee Chang-dong masterfully resists and thwarts certainty at every turn, and presents the rhetorician with stunning insights into the nature of rhetoric as an elaboration or exploitation of ambiguity to foster identity. To recognize these rhetorical connections, we must proceed with a similar amount of uncertainty. We have to abandon our tendencies to find definitive analysis or meaning in Burning. Doing so, I argue, will help us gain an understanding of how rhetoric works, and what a rhetorical perspective could teach us about how we approach both the film world and the world at large. So in this video, we'll be looking at the film from 3 levels: the diegetic level, the formal level, and a production level. We'll see layers of necessary indeterminacy involved in each, which will lead us to Covino's more holistic framing of rhetoric. Let's start with the plot, and just so you know, there are huge spoilers ahead. So, Burning, set in present-day South Korea, hinges on 3 characters: Lee Jong-seo, Shin Hemi, and Ben. Jong-seo is a listless, unemployed 20-something who can't seem to catch a break or act on his dream of becoming a novelist. His dad's in jail for assault, his sister's off and married, his mom abandoned the family when he was young. Now he's obligated to care for his father's cow farm. Jong-seo is alone in the world. He reconnects with Hemi, a childhood acquaintance. Unlike Jong-seo, Hemi actively pursues life experience. She isn't afraid to emote or seize opportunities when they arrive. Her chance meeting with Jong-seo leads to a spontaneous romantic encounter, which begins right before she's set to leave on a solo vacation to Africa. She leaves, and while he waits for her to return, Jong-seo becomes Hemi's cat sitter. When she comes back to Korea, Hemi isn't alone. She's with Ben, a mysteriously wealthy, westernized Korean who was also on vacation in Africa. Suddenly, Hemi is a 2-for-1 deal, and Jong-seo goes from cat sitter to jealous third wheel. We watch him join their excursions to fancy cafes, dinner parties with bougie friends, meals in Ben's upscale apartment, where Jong-seo snoops around and finds makeup and strange feminine mementos in the bathroom. Their collective relationship reaches a head when Ben and Hemi visit Jong-seo's home in the countryside. In a marijuana-induced conversation, Ben admits to a strange hobby: burning down abandoned greenhouses for fun. He explains to Jong-seo that he plans to burn one close by sometime soon. A few days later, Hemi goes missing. The rest of the film traces Jong-seo's attempt to figure out what happened to her. He grows suspicious of Ben, stalks him, and begins drawing conclusions. Jong-seo notices that Ben has a new girlfriend, who he treats the same way as Hemi. He also notices that none of his neighborhood greenhouses have been burned down. Then he finds what looks like Hemi's watch in Ben's drawer of female mementos. Oh, and Ben suddenly has a cat. This yields only one conclusion. Ben is a sociopathic serial killer, and he did something to Hemi. So Jong-seo concocts a plan. He lures Ben into the countryside and stabs him to death, throwing all evidence of this murder into Ben's Porsche and setting it on fire. The film ends with Jong-seo driving away from the scene of his crime. If we break our rule of proceeding with uncertainty and take these plot points at face value, it's easy to identify with Jong-seo's logic. Throughout the film, Ben is creepy. His smile is too perfect, his life is too clean and rich, his manners are too formal. Everything about him seems incriminating, which leads us to the convenient conclusion that he's a sociopathic serial killer. There's no room for elaboration within this framework. Every clue becomes justification for murder on both Ben and Jong-seo's parts, respectively. As William Covino illustrates by way of David Hume, by behaving as if necessary connections do operate in the world, as if matters of fact represent truth, we keep ourselves from inquiring into matters taken for granted, from considering the possibility that whatever is may not be. The absence of inquiry leads to definitive conclusions, and as Thomas de Quincey asserts, where conviction begins, the field of rhetoric ends. Reducing the film to this easy conclusion negates the need for rhetoric. Ben killed Hemi. End of story. But, of course, it's much more complicated than that. In his article, Sophistry, Magic, and the Vilifying Rhetoric of the Usual Suspects, David Blakesley explains, where there is ambiguity and uncertainty, when the best course of action is uncertain or knowledge at best probable, when people disagree, rhetoric comes to the fore and people contest meaning. If we stay at the diegetic level of burning and accept Blakesley's premise, we can begin to elaborate the ambiguity that leads to Jong-seo's violent decision. Retracing Jong-seo's steps, we see counterclues to the conclusions he draws. After returning from Africa, Hemi expresses a desire to disappear.
그냥 아예 없었던 것처럼 사라질 수 있었으면 좋겠다.
Thus, her disappearance could have been a fulfillment of this wish. Second, we see other women wearing the same watch as Hemi, which indicates that the watch Jong-seo found in Ben's collection of trinkets could have been someone else's. Perhaps Ben does, in fact, collect women, which is creepy and problematic, but maybe all he takes are mementos, not their lives. Finally, while cat-sitting, Jong-seo never actually sees Hemi's cat, and he even questions whether or not it exists.
넣었을 때 내가 여기 와서 상상 속의 고양이한테 먹이를 줘야 되는 거 아니냐.
The cat in Ben's apartment just happens to respond to the same name, though Jong-seo has no way to confirm that they're the same cat. There's absolutely no certainty in the plot. In his review of the film, Justin Chang put it well, the less we see, the more we fear we know. When we zoom out from plot to the film's formal elements, we get even fewer answers and even more possibilities. Covino via Kenneth Burke explains that form is the orchestration of a discourse that complicates and enlarges the possibilities for meaning. Thus, the very structure of a film allows for an elaboration of ambiguity. This becomes especially apparent when we look at the editing and mise-en-scène, as each further compounds the film's many ambiguities and leaves room for even more interpretations. I think it's fair to say that Burning is a lesson in patience. It's 148 minutes of scenes that move very slowly and employs camera cuts economically. We see entire scenes unfold in real time and transition with little to no explanation or without a sense of how much time has passed. There are few establishing shots because we're meant to wander and wonder with the characters, and we take in details that aren't directly necessary to understanding this simple version of the plot. Though scenes are densely populated with information, the on-screen action provides very little interpretation of what these elements mean. There's no handy character to deliver a line of dialogue to advance or clarify the plot.
Why haven't I seen this all along?
In fact, viewers are drawn more to their own impatience with the film's pace than the action on screen. Slow-moving scenes are juxtaposed with other slow-moving scenes, forcing the audience to fill in the blanks. The result? We get layers and layers of interpretations. You could watch the film 100 times and find something new every time. For example, before Ben goes to the countryside, we see Jong-seo in Hemi's apartment, typing on his computer. Is it his novel? Is it a manifesto? If the former, we could potentially see Ben's death as imagined by Jong-seo, perhaps a reenactment of some wishful literary thinking, which is yet another reading of the plot's disturbing end. Leaving the diegetic realm, though, we can also interpret the mise-en-scène in these elongated scenes in a number of ways. Considering that, as many have noted, South Korean filmmakers have used film as a medium to comment on relations between North and South Korea, to resist colonizing forces and express anti-American sentiment, to give voice to Minjung class politics or the people or the masses, or to critique top-down oppressive social systems and issues. We could read these intentions into the various clues Director Lee sprinkles throughout the film. For example, Jong-seo lives so close to the 38th parallel that he can hear North Korean propaganda being broadcasted across the border. Ben only lives an hour away, and he can't even recognize the sound. Is Director Lee saying South Koreans have forgotten or become desensitized to their sisters and brothers in the North? During Jong-seo's morning routine, we see him watching the news on TV and using the bathroom as Trump appears on screen. Could this juxtaposition be a proverbial middle finger to the West? We note clear class distinctions between Jong-seo and Ben's lifestyles, but gain more intimate vignettes of Jong-seo's day-to-day and emotional journey. Is this the story of the everyman raging against the Gatsbys of the world? We see the effects and frustration of unemployment on Korea's youth in a scene where Jong-seo stands in line with his obsequious peers, hungry for part-time work, while he can't bring himself to comply with the system. Is this a commentary on rampant unemployment actually plaguing Korea's youth right now? All the elements are there, but what's missing is explicit commentary. Viewers receive only hints for Director Lee's personal stance on these issues, which lends the film to multiple analyses. As a result, we have critics hailing the film as a Fitzgerald-esque class critique, a portrait of toxic masculinity, a deep dive into millennial rage, or an examination of a general feeling of dread plaguing the world today. From these diverse takes, it's clear the film enables the art of invention that Covina points to. Drawing from Michel de Montaigne, Covina explains that invention means piling up perspectives. It sees philosophical writing as a collocation of perspectives, or structure of disjunctions, without absolute terms. We see burning lending itself to such invention through the inherent ambiguity in its formal elements. There's no shortage of meaning piling up, and no one perspective to crown a certain analysis king. We see this mode of meaning-making at play even at the production level. Note that the film is an adaptation of Haruki Murakami's bare-bones short story Barn Burning, or what Peter de Bruges describes as haiku-like. In an interview at the Toronto International Film Festival, Director Lee explained why he chose the story to adapt. Here's his translator.
I thought that this mystery within the story itself could be expanded into bigger and other mysteries, and I thought that would be an interesting story that I can make into film.
An audience member asked how Director Lee was able to make the story, which was originally published in 1983, relevant for today. Again, through his translator, he explained,
I think that the historical or the background of Murakami's short story is actually unclear, and I think that the stories and the topics and the issues that the short story touches on is perfectly capable of being put into the modern world and the problems that the current world encompasses.
The ambiguity Murakami writes into his story makes it a rich source for film adaptation, making the film itself an invented perspective piling up. In addition to the film's adaptation, we see openness to ambiguity in both the director and the direction of his film. Himself a successful novelist, Director Lee came to the film industry later in his life and began his career as a filmmaker in his 40s. Explaining his reasons for this shift at an interview with the British Film Institute, Director Lee said through a translator,
"In the East, this Chinese philosopher had said, once you turn 40, you can no longer be seduced. And I think for me, it was actually quite the opposite. On the contrary, when I turned 40, I basically started questioning and having thoughts, queries about the path I was on and about my life. And I think for me, I felt that I didn't want to continue down this same path, but try a different path. And for me, that was making films."
He enacts what Covino via Jacques Derrida describes of the postmodern critic, that resisting enclosure by institutionalized structures requires intellectual play by writers who recognize the limitations of their discourse clearly enough to push against them. Director Lee exemplifies such a writer who resists closure and instead embraces the ambiguous path to forge new territories in a new medium. Even in this new medium, though, Director Lee still resists closure. In a conversation with Kim Masters on her NPR podcast, The Business, he acknowledges the constraints put on film by both audience and commercial expectations. He explains that straightforward films tend to play better at the box office. He, however, seeks to thwart these expectations.
저 역시 상업 영화에 대한 압박을 계속.
Ever since I made my first feature film, I think I have been working within the commercial industry of a film medium. So definitely, I have a pressure over the box office result of my film. And as for Burning, on the surface, it looks like a kind of mystery thriller genre movie, but at the same time, it's very unique. So if some audience expect something very conventional, they may be either frustrated or maybe embarrassed. So it has this certain commercial danger. And not only in Korea, but all over the world, I think that the films, commercial films, tend to be easier and simpler. And for some reason, I want to go against the grain of this trend. So when the audience come to see this film in the theater, I want to give them the new cinematic experience. And at the same time, I ask them to raise questions about the world as we live now in, and also their lives. So they will raise these questions after watching the film.
Thus, as an auteur, ambiguity is his MO. The same goes for his directing. Covino via Thomas de Quincey argues that rhetoric fully exercised does not encourage blind adherence, but rather full participation in the art of wondering, that state of tense exertion on the part of both auditor and performer. We see this art of wondering in both Director Lee's casting decisions and his direction of the actors. When casting Hemi, for example, Director Lee chose rookie actress Jong-seo. In discussing his decision to cast her, he explains via a translator.
Burning is Jong-seo's first feature. She hadn't actually even auditioned for anything before then. When I first met her, the feeling that I got from her was that I couldn't really figure out what she was thinking or what she was about, and this aspect of her, the fact that it feels like she's hiding various stories and feelings within her, that feeling itself made me think that she could portray Hemi.
Again, we see Director Lee pursuing ambiguity. The same goes for his casting of Korean-American actor Stephen Yeun, the only non-native Korean in the film. In an interview with Tom Power for the Q Video podcast, Yeun explains,
and the genius of Director Lee's casting, in my opinion, is he wanted some of my Americanness in it. In so much as that the character's not a Korean American, but he's a traveled man, and he's a worldly man. And he's almost someone you can't figure out in traditional Korean archetypes. So you can't say that person's like this type of person or that person's like this type of person. Really, you kind of have no idea who this person is and where he's from or what he's about. He's eternally mysterious that way. And so he juxtaposed the work that I had to put in to perfect my Korean and perfect kind of the way that I move through Korea as a human being. And he juxtaposed that to the Americanness of me that I can't fully shed for myself. That I think was really pretty cool. It confused people. in the right way.
And this confusion was necessary to pull off the equally confusing Ben. Once cast, these actors didn't blindly adhere to a director's almighty vision. Instead, Director Lee created immense breathing room. At TIFF, Yun responded to a question asking about how he accessed his character Ben. Yun explained.
Talking with Director Lee about it, we never got to the nitty-gritty of like, I want you to do this at this time. It was more just a general, how does this person view the world and the people that inhabit it? Sorry, that's such a vague answer to your question. Apologize.
Here, Yun describes an approach to directing that allows actors to elaborate on the ambiguity of their characters for themselves. In other words, to identify with their characters in all their complexity. Jong-seo described a similar experience in an interview with James Prestridge. One of her main takeaways from playing her role, she explains, is to accept someone rather than act them. Put another way, she learned to identify instead of control, to accept ambiguity and the ensuing adventure instead of putting herself in a box. According to the actors, this experience with a director so comfortable with ambiguity was both transformative and freeing. Of this, Yun says,
when you see someone who's 65, being able to lay down his own ego, to readdress himself and society and put a mirror up to it and say, this is the truth that I believe in now, or that there is no truth, that really we're evolving as we go, and he's willing to lay down his ego constantly to get to that, that's incredible. And so a lasting image is, he'll do something like, we'll shoot a scene, he'll watch it on the monitor again, and he'll go, let's do it again tomorrow. And you don't question it. You come back the next day, you do it tomorrow, and all of a sudden in that same scene, a flock of geese flies through the back of the frame.
Oh, wow.
And then you're like, okay, you were just waiting for that. And he wasn't waiting for the flock of geese, he was just waiting for it. And he gets it every time.
This it is what rhetoric is after. It is something we can't access unless we allow ambiguity to have a seat at the table. Once it's elaborated, magic happens, and this magic perpetuates wonder. It doesn't shut it down. Like Covino says via Cicero and Aristotle, the rhetor habitually learning and wondering, the rhetor unconstrained by some purpose or end stance, makes better speeches. This is why Burning is such a masterpiece, why it's able to provoke so many necessary social and ideological critiques, why its adaptation was so effective, why its actors gave such convincing performances, why Lee Chang-dong is such a brilliant director. There is no fear of ambiguity in this film, only its celebration, and thus a celebration of rhetoric.